this presentation was going to be made by Daniel Rothhutz from the University of Eastern Finland. Unfortunately, health issues have prevented him from coming here, and in any case, I would have supported any other colleague. Obviously, I don't have Daniel Rauhut's expert knowledge, but this coordination work gives you this global issue, and this is something which is truly fascinating for us, because at Nasubinsa what we do is supporting policies that have to do with the territory and with sustainability. So it is true that the speed at which we have had to produce data, I think, has been reflected in previous speaks. I mean, 2 years ago we lived in a world that didn't exist. We were given this project. We had never heard of COVID. Although the first meeting had to be online, and we have had Carlos, the weatherman, who's talked about the summer storm and the winter storm. We had not imagined the COVID issue, a war between two old Soviet republics. It was unimaginable. There are very interesting policy issues here at the European level, which is a change of scale, or a higher scale than where we usually work, but also for the strategies of regional development. In this sense, here there's a question which has to be taken into account, is that most of the flows that we have been analyzing, they don't see the logic of a nation, or a state, or regional line. But there isn't so much margin to be able to determine these flows. You can't force a company to stop manufacturing here, or you can't tell immigrants to go elsewhere. And with capital investments, that's also the same case. So governance is complicated. We can share knowledge, we can talk about advantages. It is true that we can regulate the European Union more and less so at the national level, and even less so at the regional level. Because of this market logic, we have been looking for efficiency. What the great beneficiaries are the cities, urban areas, those mega, and those small regions, those places that don't matter. Which is what they call in the European Commission. They're really prejudiced by flows. This has an impact. And then I'll talk from the European point of view as well. In the regional strategy areas, they normally don't express how they're going to be funded. And when they look at the funding framework, they don't talk about how they're going to spend the European funds. This is something that we should deal with, and something we have observed and we should want to share. Also, saying how to spend these funds intelligently, because they're going to ask us what we have spent and what we've spent it on. And this is this bureaucratic nightmare that every region is suffering. In addition to this, I have my strategic vision, and this is where I'm going to put the money. Cooperation with neighboring regions is essential. Nobody should imagine that nobody's going to be against cooperation at this time, but cooperating with your neighbors. In the case of Navarre, we have Navarra, Euskadi, and Aquitaine. In this analysis of flows, we see that very often our partners, because we have received immigrants from those territories, or because we have a flow of capital or services or goods, what happens is that our neighbors are not as close as they could be. So we focus on our strength, and we forget. I am like these 20 European regions, and that's fine. But you also need to know that there are companies with whom I'm cooperating. Why not set up links with the regional authorities that are regulating and are going to affect those companies that are partnering with our companies. So really, neighbors' cooperation should also be with regions where we share not so much proximity as collaborating companies. In Navarre, we're very good about doing things. We're not so good about telling about them, but we have a diverse local personality, but very often this regional brand, which is essential, is not perceived. It's a succession of proposals, of ideas, but we forget that they're not economic or social, they're also cultural. And this is another aspect which is also interesting, that they should try to market their region as a brand, or their region brand. With respect to territorial cohesion, the market couldn't care less about these things. You have this the regions that are lagging behind. As Thomas also mentioned this morning, and the links between regions are increasing, and the countries that have been the latest to join the community, they had a very low starting point, and they're converging at top speed. Today's Poland is not the Poland of 25 years ago, and this is with all the countries that have joined the European Union. We could say the same thing about Spain. I was quite young, but Spain 30 years ago, economically, socially, has nothing to do with Spain of today. Truly, this is having a territorial development which is cohesive, which is with equity, requires a political will. Things do not occur through inertia. So we need a very strong public response. But the same thing as with the energy transition, if you think that the state or the region is going to solve the problems of energy transition, those of you or those of us who are in this business, it requires the extensive public-private partnerships, and for many decades to come. And this is the same case with the convergence and the reduction of inner gaps and within our region. In this sense, one of the aspects that Daniel wanted to share is to have intermediate hubs within regions. In one of Thomas's, we could see the doors that opened access. The European capitals are the large gates for other areas to join. But you can scale this down, and you can have intermediate hubs like Navarre. It's very small in Spain, like most of you know. But for those of you from Europe, in absolute terms, we're very small. When we look at relative terms, we see that the industrial weight of Navarre, and we want to transfer this to the territory. We have had a policy of distributing industrial policies in different sections in Navarre, and we want to continue doing this. And this is a little bit for many regions that are not doing this. In highly centralized countries, this at the regional level is interesting. France is trying to decentralize this. They're trying to do it. And the regions, they're trying to enable all the resources to grow in a sustainable manner. From a regional perspective, in the case of Navarre, there were a number of workshops, and there were small things which added to all these efforts. We had this biomass example, which came out in that workshop we had. We didn't know that Navarre was going to make a commitment with this. We have the Director General of Energy who's going to participate in the roundtable discussion, and there is a proposal for this energy that has this difficult short-term conversion. We're going to use local biomass or from nearby regions, and to be working with the regional the neighboring regions. And we realized that there's something that is going to be I'm going to repeat this. The competence for many of the challenges, the member states, and I'm going to have the regulations of European regulations, and sometimes we have to continue with the behind the on the wake of the European Union. I'm going to talk a little bit about energy transition. This is one of the star subjects. Energy transition was one of the key aspects. This energy transition and this war is affecting, and it's going to even more affect even regional flows even more, because as transport costs grow, if the energy I was getting from here and now I'm getting it from somewhere else, this is going to have a lot of regions falling from the these flows. And this goes against territorial goals in Europe, and this is what we're trying to avoid. In addition, on the threats that we see, the first, there are great opportunities of economic growth and of favoring circular economy. And the question is that we have really no other choice. We had to do that, but the conflict is sort of has brought up this mirror. We're looking at, and many of the policies of this economicist and vision that was seeking efficiency has placed us in a very vulnerable position. Yes, we have those sanctions, but we see that they're not going to be as effective as we thought they would be. This has a territorial perspective that doesn't affect us all equally. But there are many regions and countries that are very vulnerable. Cyprus is not a surprise, but Ireland certainly is. With respect to the long-term economic impact, if I have less money, I'll spend it less on other products because I have to spend more on energy. That's what Carlos mentioned. The consumption patterns that we have seen are not sustainable. I think all of us can imagine that. But truly, the speed at which we consume raw materials, fuels, we don't have enough planet for all this. It's what we were talking about yesterday about the circular economy. Here we're at a stage of transition, and we change the paradigm, we change the scenario, and the protagonist of the film is not a protagonist anymore, or secondary actors. Norway is now in a sweet spot, but it's going to last what it lasts. And this is particularly of concern for regions that are already vulnerable, the ones that have lower levels of governance, fewer resources to manage their capacities, and this is going to give us less time to manage this. And from a European perspective, this is something that we're leaning to a whole new approach. Another major problem. I think we have to talk about humanity. We have to talk about the economic part and commerce. If my commerce is not sustainable, if my commerce does not support jobs, then it's not sustainable. The human part of the conflict in Ukraine. I'm going to give you some examples that Daniel gave us. If I would ask you, what is the greatest crisis of refugees in Europe, you would say the Second World War. Only in Germany, there were 7 million refugees. Not dead or prisoners, but actual refugees. Until 1960, the last refugee camp didn't close in West Germany. This refugee crisis, we have had prior crises. It has helped us to learn. The 2015 crisis was quite different because of their education level, because they were young men in military age that were fleeing the conflict with very little education in many cases. But it served to see that we didn't have compensation mechanisms among countries. It was very difficult to agree at the European level how to distribute all those refugees. And currently we see that now we have more than 8 million Ukrainians have entered the EU since February 24th. We were saying that the Second World War and 7 million refugees. Well, we have 8 million refugees, and plus another 7 that have internally displaced in Ukraine. So 1/3 of the population of Ukraine. It's like in Spain, you know, of the 45 million Spaniards, 15 million have had to either leave the country or move to a different region. And additionally, another 2.5 million have been deported to Russia by force. Most of the times they had just forcibly been deported to Russia. The target countries are the eastern countries, Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, because there's already a network, a connection network. Migrants, they use their family networks to move to other places. And this is what has been occurring. It's the biggest refugee crisis ever in Europe. We've never had one like this. Because there are mechanisms, and because the level of solidarity is tremendous, because we know what we're not aware, but in Eastern Europe there's a lot of fear. They were part of the Soviet bloc, and they know exactly what these people are like. I mean, we're seeing this in Ukraine. So there's a willingness to resist at all costs, because if they don't, then all of a sudden they're not in Ukraine, they're going to be in a different place. Let's also talk about Russia. Many who do not want to go and fight because they know how badly they're doing on a military point of view. And militarily, the failure is absolute of the Russian army. Half a million Russians. These are men in military age. Since they were the mobilization orders were issued, since the war started, we've had 1 million Russians. And that million is there's normally educated. It's a true brain drain. You have these people with their families, they're young and with a high educational level. Since 2010, 10 young, well-educated Russians have left Russia. And this explains many things. What is the challenge of this? But the pressure on the rest of Europe is, and this is going to, in Germany, they have in Germany there are very large figures of taking in refugees. One is bilateral agreements between regions. Another, renegotiating the framework, having seen having an instrument and a common framework of channeling of these refugees, like the United States. Well, maybe not the United States is not a good example, but it should be managed by the EU as a whole. To conclude my presentation, apart from the efforts of the European Union and the efforts of different administrations, different governments, we're human, and when we make decisions based on fear, there are consequences. There's a trend this temptation to rebordering, to close borders. We saw that in the refugee crisis in 2015, 2016 with the Syrian refugees, where they limited population controls, particularly in Eastern Europe and also in any other country. And with COVID, it was really impressive. I mean, a lot of decisions were made to close borders. I don't want to get into assessing whether it was right or not, but it set a precedent, and this precedent has other precedents, and there are laws in Hungary, in Switzerland, revoking tax treatments with Portugal, so with Sweden, sorry. So because all the Swedes were moving to Portugal, so all the there was all the Swedish money being spent in Portugal. What are the consequences? We're not talking about physical obstacles, but also administrative, and this has some questions which are they're not in the debate right now, but we started with some restrictions, and we're working at times of transition, and we should pay attention to these. One of the fundamental pillars of the Union is the free movement of individuals, of goods and services, and of capital, and we have to value this because we can see the macro figures that we're seeing, and this is an issue that should encourage us to keep going. Thank you very much. I'm not Daniel. I've tried to do it better, but thank you for your attention.
Would anybody like to ask a question? Yeah, you wanted to escape, but you can't.